When I was transitioning from being a school speech pathologist to a self-employed person, a lot of career advice centered around having to go all in on one thing and just burning all boats and leap and the net will appear. And here's why I don't recommend that advice for clinicians. I know that there's a lot of advice in kind of the entrepreneur space about taking big risks and high risk reward, but that just doesn't work for a lot of the clinicians that I work with who are considering a career transition. I'm Karen Dudek-Brannan, and I help pediatric therapists to map out their next career move so that they can create services and a career that is fulfilling and impactful to them and that they're excited to do. And I actually went through a career transition myself. I worked in the schools for 14 years as an SLP. And right now I'm a self-employed person, and I have a business where I do continuing education online for therapists and lots of other coaching and consulting. But in the course of designing that business, I did get a lot of, I guess I would say, bad advice that really encouraged a lot of risky behavior. And so I think that a lot of times when, with clinicians specifically, there's not necessarily a ton of business advice for therapists. And this is true for speech pathologists, OTs, music therapists, psychologists, social workers. We don't really get a lot of training on the business side or even the career advice. We get a lot of clinical advice in our pre-service training. But when it comes to trying to start a business or trying to advance in the next stage of your career, if you want to continue to be self-employed and go to higher ed or a leadership position, there isn't a lot of good information out there right away that we can access that helps us through this. And so what I did is that I turned to some of these, other people who are offering courses online about how to start a business, how to make a career transition. And it's really hard to sift out the good from the bad advice. So I wanted to just pinpoint one piece of, I guess I would say, bad advice or questionable advice that you might want to reconsider. And again, that is the whole idea about having to go all in on one thing. And that, if you're not committed, if you don't just go all in and quit your job and, have some dramatic exit and then go all in on your business and things like that. And the thing is that whether you are starting a business or whether you're trying to transition out to something else, like, for example, if you're doing some adjunct work and you want to try to find a tenure track position or something like that, just taking this huge leap when you don't have your next step fully mapped out can actually be pretty risky. It can be really stressful, and it can be a recipe for making some really poor decisions. So what I actually recommend people do is what I refer to as micro experiments, where you map out a couple different options that you think you would like, that you think you want to try out for your next stage in your career. Like if you are employed and you want to start a private practice, you can start taking some clients on the side. If you are working in a clinical setting and you want to move to a higher ed setting, you can start doing some adjunct work at a university and start doing some teaching. Or if you're interested in that and you can't find adjunct work right away, you can start doing some presentations in your community, at professional seminars and things like that to see if you enjoy presenting and teaching. You can also sometimes work with universities in your area to get clinicians to come and do clinical practicum in your setting if you want to work with the university and start getting your foot in the door that way. And so there's a lot of opportunities to work with universities if if you want to stay in the security of your current job and just kind of test it out and see what's available. Some of the other things that you can do as well that I haven't mentioned yet is if you want to transition to a leadership or supervision position, that's another thing where you can start doing some mini test runs and little projects in your current clinical role without actually taking a huge leap and having to leave your position before you know what's next. What I did when I was in the schools is that I would do a lot of mini administrative projects. So I would volunteer for things that needed to be done in my district. And they would be things that would be kind of above and beyond my role as a therapist, but they were things that administrators would have to take care of. And so I would sometimes volunteer to do those things to see if I liked them, to just do kind of a test run to see, is a job in school administration something that I would like? So that is what I recommend doing, is to try to get your foot in the door, start building up that portfolio of experience, and also do these test runs or these micro experiments to see if you like it. And that can kind of help you to do a couple things. Number one, get the experience that you need, get your foot in the door so that you can get some things set up, which helps to minimize your risks, or and also just to start, in some cases, earning some additional income on the side, because a lot of these things can be income generating. Now, one thing I will say is that there is something to be said for focusing. I do obviously recommend that. And so I was at the point, at one point, when I was doing a lot of different little exploratory experiments for myself. I was doing a lot of things at one point. At one point, I was working full time in the schools as a therapist. I also had an adjunct assignment I was teaching for university. I also had a couple of clients on the side, and I was building my business. So I was blogging, and I was writing a course independently. So I had 4 things I was doing at once. I'll admit that was kind of a lot. What that allowed me to do was to see which things stuck, and then eliminate some of the other things that I was doing so that I could focus on one. So the whole advice about, focus on one thing at a time, burn all boats. I don't necessarily recommend doing that specifically where you're literally focusing on one thing, but I do recommend building one thing. So it's less of a, burn all boats and you can only do one thing. You don't have to just do one thing, but it does make sense to build one thing and put a lot of your focus into one thing at a time. Meaning, when I was starting to add these other things, I had been working in the schools for a while, and I had kind of gone through that initial learning curve of how to navigate my school position. So I wasn't totally on autopilot, but it didn't take a lot of my cognitive resources. I was pretty comfortable. So I had some mental energy to focus on these other things. And so then I could, get comfortable over here. And then I had actually the bandwidth to focus on, what's my next new challenge. So I do recommend kind of placing your mental energy on one thing, even if you're literally not just doing one thing at a time. And how this sometimes looks for people who want to create kind of a customized career path is that they might actually be doing multiple things at a time. Their ideal career might be a combination of different income streams. They might be partially self-employed and partially employed, whatever it is, but they might put their main focus on one thing at a time. They'll focus on adding one new thing at a time, adding one habit at a time. So how this might look, how it looked for me was I got comfortable in the schools, and then I started adding these other things, and I tested them out. And then I realized that for me, the online business option was what stuck. So then I started, eliminating those other things so that I could focus a lot of my energy on building that business faster. So in a way, I was sort of focusing on one thing, but I still had my school position running in the background. So it's more of a concept of, not just doing one thing at a time, but putting your focus on one thing at a time, building one bridge at a time. Because what can happen is that, you get comfortable with one thing, you're good, you have the energy to add something else, you get comfortable with that thing, you add that. And then, once you work through the learning curve with that new thing and you're ready for the next challenge, you can keep layering these things on top of each other. And how that happens for a lot of people is that they're just building bridges, building income streams, building services that they offer so that they can, obviously earn more in their career and be more successful from that standpoint, but also so that they can build this, this different way, all these different ways of being of service with their clinical skills. And for some people, it does make sense to go all in. Like, obviously, if you transition from a clinical position to a leadership position, you might actually have to leave your job. But you don't have to right away, when you're experimenting, immediately do some crazy risky thing. You can keep the security of your job while experimenting with these other things. So I definitely recommend that for people who are trying to figure out what's next for them as a clinician, if they want to be able to make a bigger impact with their services. So I'm actually helping guide people through these stages of career exploration in a free event that's called the Clinical Leadership Roundtable. What it is a 3-stage process that I will guide you through, that will take you through a series of exercises to identify what your mission is, who you like to work with, how you like to work, to kind of figure out what type of work environment and what type of setting and what your dream career looks like. And then I take you through a series of exercises to actually start to take tangible steps to make that happen. So to join the Clinical Leadership Roundtable and go through those stages to start mapping out your next career move, go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/leadership roundtable. Again, that's drkarendudek-brannan.com/leadership